Being king was dangerous. People were trying to kill you all the time. Wars, assassins, betrayals. So you'd expect most kings to die doing something heroic. History had other ideas. Because one king got taken out by a monkey, another reportedly laughed himself to death. And one ruler literally ate himself into a grave. Then there was the king who lost a fight with a doorway. And somehow, those aren't even the strangest examples. Let's start with the monkey, because somehow, this little guy helped kill a king. His name was King Alexander of Greece, and honestly, things were going pretty well for him. Then, one day, he decided to take a walk, a completely normal walk, until his dog found a monkey. And that's when everything went spectacularly wrong. Now, before you picture some giant killer gorilla, it wasn't. We're talking about a monkey that looked like this, and somehow, that was enough. Apparently, the king's dog decided to start a fight, which is already a sentence no king wants attached to his obituary. Then Alexander rushed in to break it up, and that's when the monkey bit him. At first, it didn't seem like a big deal. Unfortunately, history loves those 5 words. The bite looked minor, so Alexander did what most people would do. He basically forgot about it. The problem was, the bite hadn't forgotten about him, because the wound started getting worse, then worse, and then much, much worse. Suddenly, a king was losing a battle, not against an army, against a monkey bite. And eventually, the infection won. King Alexander died at just 27 years old. Which brings us to our next king, and somehow, this story gets even stranger. Because King Martin survived political crises, he survived wars. But his biggest enemy turned out to be something much less threatening. Instead, the real danger showed up during dinner, and it all started with a joke. According to the story, Martin asked his favorite jester to tell him something funny. The jester delivered, and Martin thought it was the funniest thing he'd ever heard. The problem was, Martin couldn't stop laughing. At first, everyone else was laughing too. Then, people started noticing Martin was still going. And then things got a little weird, because Martin wasn't laughing normally anymore. According to the story, he started struggling to breathe. Suddenly, nobody was laughing. And if the story is true, King Martin laughed himself to death. Although historians still argue about how accurate that story really is. It's still one of the funniest ways a king has ever supposedly died. And somehow, our next king managed to top it. Meet King Adolf Frederick of Sweden. Unlike the last king, Adolf wasn't killed by a monkey. And he definitely didn't laugh himself to death. His problem was much simpler. The man really liked food. And honestly, that's not a crime. But Adolf decided to test that theory. Because one night, he sat down for what would become one of the most famous meals in history. And when I say big meal, I don't mean he had an extra dessert. I mean this man treated dinner like a competitive sport. According to the story, he started with lobster, then caviar, then sauerkraut, then smoked fish. And somehow, the meal still wasn't finished, because then came dessert. Not one dessert, not 2 desserts, but 14 semla buns. And after eating all of that, he complained of stomach pain. A few hours later, the king was dead. That's it. No assassination, no battlefield, just dinner. And somehow, that wasn't even the dumbest royal death. And trust me, it somehow gets worse. Then there was Charles VIII of France, the guy who invaded Italy. One day, King Charles VIII was attending a tennis match inside a royal indoor court. After the match, Charles begins walking toward the exit without much thought. He steps forward, not noticing how low the doorway really is. His momentum carries him forward. He hits his head on the doorway, but he thinks he is fine. He even continues talking to the others, brushing it off. Then suddenly, his body stops responding. He collapses right there in front of everyone. King Charles VIII of France died in 1498 at the age of 27. History is a lot less serious than school made it sound. And honestly, that's probably why it's worth learning.